and welcome to the France 24 interview. I'm Mairead Dundas. 5 years ago, 195 countries and one deal. The first time the world came together to agree on a universal pact aimed at reducing global emissions, of course known as the Paris Agreement. France was host of the talks, and pulling the strings, often in the shadows, was one woman in particular. Our guest today, Laurence Tubiana, former chief climate negotiator for France, often described as the architect of the agreement. Laurence Tubiana, many thanks for joining us here on France 24.
Hello, yes, thank you for the invitation.
Now, a critical element of the deal was that countries would review progress every 5 years. Here we are in 2020. Without being too pessimistic, is it fair to say that not enough was promised in Paris and not enough has been done since then?
Of course, the Paris Agreement initially asked for countries to present, and this was happening much before the agreement was concluded, because most of the countries present their first draft of the climate plan ahead of the Paris conference itself. And of course, the rule in the Paris Agreement book is that 5 years after, exactly when the Paris Agreement will be really implementing, which is starting 2020, the countries has to revise their climate plan up to anyways a level that is more consistent with the global goals that they agreed in Paris, which is maintaining the temperature well below 2 degrees C and potentially, of course, maintaining the capacity to maintain temperature to no more than 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial level. So that's why 2020 is a very important year. And of course, now with the COVID crisis, it has been pushed to next year at the COP in Glasgow. So yes, the draft that were presented, which were the name was the intended climate plan, was presented in Paris, were not enough to be consistent with the Paris global goal. And they were leading us to a global temperature increase about 3 degrees. And so that's why countries has to come back with much better plan this year in 2020. And because of the crisis, of course, will happen between now and 2021.
Is that very important, the fact that COP, the climate talks, have been postponed an entire year? I mean, every day or month or year counts. Do we have that time to lose? Only a handful of countries have actually raised their ambition.
Of course, that's a pity that we could not have a proper COP in 2020, but really it was it was impossible. Just look at the COVID situation in Europe in particular. So anyway, we didn't have choice. Meanwhile, it doesn't mean that the countries cannot prepare their plan. And you see that in particular for the celebration of the 5th anniversary of Paris, a number of countries has come with already much better plans. It's the case of Europe, which will propose this 55% of emission reduction by 2030 compared to the 40% that was on the table in Paris. The same for UK, minus 68% announced by Boris Johnson 3 or 4 days ago. Again, a big increase. And what is even more interesting is that these countries present not only the targets, the numbers, but the way they will achieve that in terms of where they want to change the power, the buildings, the industry, the transport. It's much more concrete now than it was, of course, 5 years ago, and much more completed. And you have seen that China has sort of announced that they will, in a way, peak their emission before 2030. We hope, of course, something better from them even now, and that by 2060 they will be carbon neutral. And you have seen Japan and South Korea and many other countries coming. So we are in a moment where that's a moment, that was a date, no? And because of that, countries are preparing now climate plans that hopefully, but we are not sure of this, will be consistent with Paris goal. But nevertheless, there are not only the countries that has to do that, because Paris is about government, of course, but it is about as well as businesses, local authorities, financial institutions. And this, you see quite a big movement to commit to net zero by 2050 by many actors. And of course, what is asked from them, again, for next year, because it has been displaced to COP26, really a very detailed plan of how they get there. So I am more optimistic than I was 7 months ago. Of course, the Biden election of Joe Biden has changed, of course, a lot of perspective, because Trump policy was quite negative on the attitude of many countries. But you see China, you see US, you see Europe pointing in the same direction. That's a very powerful signal for the global economy.
How important is the President-elect Joe Biden coming to the climate table? I mean, we often in the last few years have said, oh, we can go ahead without the US. The countries don't need the US. The states and the cities are going on their own. But now, I mean, now that everything's happened in terms of what climate activists would like to see, a leader that's kind of proactive in terms of the climate, how big an impact do you think it will have?
It's a positive. Of course, the important piece was Europe standing up, in particular, of course, last year and this year, with these new objectives for net zero by 2050 and now the 2030 target, and coming above all with a way to get there, which what we call the Green Deal in Europe. So that was a first mover that was so important to decide China to move forward. Mm-hmm. But of course, the coming back of US in the Paris Agreement is very important. One, because again, you have then the three major economies that are going to the decarbonization trend, which is again an extremely powerful signal to all business, all global value chains, all financial actors. And at the same time, of course, the US is a very important player, is a second emitter at world level. It has, of course, a lot of influence economically. It's a big, big market, a big industrial and technological power. So yes, it's very important. And again, the meaning that in the G7, there will be no divergence, no dissonance between the major economic players, because all of them will have 2050 plans, and hopefully all of them by next year will have 2030 better targets. But then, of course, the addition of now China moving forward, and probably many other countries joining China in G20 group, give us another sense. On one sense, Trump policy didn't destroy the Paris Agreement. Finally, it revealed more resilient, as you said. There was economic actors, cities, whatever, that continued referring to the Paris as a norm. But of course, politically, it's super important. And a joint relation, an increased relation between Europe and US, in my view, is really, really of crucial importance for the development of this green economy.
You touched then on the importance of China. I wanted to touch on China in particular. Of course, very positive news, want to be carbon neutral by 2060. And at the same time, if we look at the actions that are happening right now, by mid-2020, China has permitted more new coal plant capacity than in 2018 and 2019 together. How should we interpret this? 2060 versus what's happening right now, it's incoherent.
Yes, totally. And that's why I think the discussion has to continue with China. And of course, that's related to some concern of China, the internal discussion on where to orient the economic development. But certainly the coal issue in China is a very, very important one. And I hope if China wants to show leadership, and that's apparently what the leadership would like to demonstrate, not only is good to have a 2060 target, but it has to go really consistent with a 14 five-year plan, for example. And, as you say, the decision around the coal pipeline, in a way, in China, and the international investment that China is making outside, in particular on the fossil fuel sector. So, the word is hope for China to change the gear, to shift from financing fossil fuel to financing green economy. And I hope we will see that before Glasgow.
Well, no one could have anticipated the COVID-19 pandemic that we've seen and the effect it's had on all aspects of our life. Projecting for the future, do you think in the end, all things considered, that for the climate, it'll have a better or worse outcome?
Well, of course, it's still difficult to know, but I was very concerned when this COVID crisis exploded in Europe in particular, that climate action was quite strongly embedded in the Green Deal of Europe was put on the back burner. But finally, I'm reassured by the fact that most citizens in Europe and most governments are really rallying around the Green Deal as a direction to take. And I have seen the rhetoric, at least the narrative of green recovery, taking place in many other countries. But yes, we have to see really the reality on the ground, where this massive public investment are going to land. Are they finally pushing the economy in the direction that are needed? We are still to see the result of all this major public investment. But on the other side, I do think that when I look at least, again, looking at the Western public, the Europeans, the US citizen, and in many other countries as well, people are concerned with climate change because they feel the impact already much more than before. And they see as well how they can solve the problem. So I would say we'll see if it is a shift here. I hope so, because we need really now to reorient the economy. There are good signals, but of course we have to recognize that for the moment we are lagging behind what has to be done to be really consistent with Paris goal.
Many thanks for joining us, Laurence Tubiana. Safe to say that 2021 will be a critical year for climate talks on the global stage. Thank you very much for being with us, and we look forward to following this in the weeks and months to come. And many thanks to you for joining us here on France 24. Don't go anywhere, because we've got more news and reports coming up.